Okay, this being the fifth installment of the what we call strategy teaching of disciple making to the point of reproduction that will eventuate to world impact. These sessions have two purposes. The first one is for informational reasons, to relay these ideas to someone who may be curious or seeking these things out or wanting to know more about it. Second reason is so that the person who is preparing to teach these lessons, that they will be able to see what is being said, how it's being presented, and also what's written on the board. So if you're preparing to teach this and you're unsure, say exactly what is being said and write exactly what's being written on the board, and that you'll be able to present the ideas in a way that it will make sense according with the other lessons. So with that in mind, let's look back at some of the previous sessions that were given, and that was lesson one, or session one, was entitled How Vital is Vision? And vision is what we defined it, was seeing things from God's point of view. Not my vision, not your vision, but God's vision. What does He mean? What does He say? When He says something about this subject, what does He mean by it? Not about what I mean, not what you mean, not what we agree upon. That's not important. Truth is what God says. So vision. Second thing we looked at was our only marching orders, the mandate that every believer has, which is the Great Commission. So what is the Great Commission? Go everywhere and turn people into disciples. Disciples that Jesus built, what He made, what He turned His men into, is what He was saying when He was saying, go make disciples, which means make people of the same kind. So our only mandate, the only marching orders that God ever gave His church is go everywhere and make disciples. So the third subject, or the third session that we talked about, we just didn't leave the disciple idea in a vacuum where you can come up with your own definition. We defined those terms: disciple, discipling, discipler, disciplines. We looked at all those things, and we looked at it from not my point of view again, not your point of view, but what does God say? When Jesus stood on that mountain that day, what did He mean? What did He turn His men into? And there's your standard. So disciple is not something we can come up with, something that we think. It's something that God says. So it's very important that we understand the definitions or the vocabulary that is used in this strategy that He presented. The fourth session that we talked about, we gave it a biblical example of what this might look like. And we talked about Dr. Luke and how Luke got into the story, how Paul discipled Dr. Luke, how Luke in turn discipled Brother Paul by giving him ideas possibly about the human body and about some of the things that how the body functions. And it's very possible. But also we looked at Luke and Theophilus, that Luke wrote 2 books to one man. So the whole focus of the fourth session was the importance of one man to one man. Can't say that enough. The importance of one man to one man. So today we're going to kind of continue that idea with session 5, which is the essentials for making disciples. Now, I want to draw your attention to something that's on the board that we may just look over, gloss over, ignore it, not really pay much attention to, and that is making disciples. Disciples are made. They just do not just burst out of the ground. They just do not appear magically, and even though God could do that if He wanted to do that. If He wanted to, He could, just like He made Adam, He could make a ready-made person ready to go. But that's not the way He chose to do it. He chose to invite us into that process, and disciples are made. So in this session today, we're going to be looking at that. we're going to be looking at more extensively what are some of the basic ideas that you're going to have to make disciples. Our text is going to be in Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. And let's read it so we can just get it in front of us. For as much as many have taken in hand to set forth in order a declaration of those things which are most surely believed among us, even as they were delivered, even as they delivered them unto us, which from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word. It seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write unto thee in order, most excellent Theophilus, that thou mightest know the certainty of those things wherein thou hast been instructed. So, here's the example again we talked about in lesson 4, which is you have Dr. Luke having this person, Theophilus, who apparently it was a nobleman. We'll talk about that a little bit. But he took the responsibility to spend enormous amounts of time researching to write a document. Now, one of the things that I said last session, or what was said last session, was that the book of Luke and the book of Acts, the two books that Luke wrote to this one man, makes up 25% of your New Testament. Makes up 25% of my New Testament. Now, where are the people that are willing to write that much for one person? You see, we can't think small. We think of big ministries. We think of big explosions. But Jesus didn't look at that way. Neither did Paul. Neither did Luke. They spent their life to focus, just like we talked about the magnifying glass, to start a fire, focused in order to build a person into reproduction, into multiplication, into world impact. So the very first point here is personal responsibility. Personal responsibility. You see, if you don't feel personal responsibility, I guarantee what will happen. You won't do it. See, you think that this is our problem. Well, I'm sorry, it's not. It's yours. It's your problem. If you're a believer and you have Christ existing and living in you, it's your problem. But it's not your problem, it's my problem. Hello? Where's the believer who will handle that truth? That will feel the debt. Now, you might think that I have no right to say that. You might think that I say that in a vacuum. I'm confident in what I'm saying. Because the Word teaches that it's our responsibility. We are in heavy, heavy debt. And we'll not go deeply into that, but I will tell you, without any kind of reservation, it is your problem. And you need a way to get this done. And you say, well, I don't know how to get this done. Well, good news. I didn't know how to get this done either. But the good news is, God's already done it. God's already made it. He's already made a way. All we have to do is get in on it. Remember, it's our mandate to make disciples. And it's not something you can pay someone to do. It's your responsibility, personal responsibility. Let me give you an example. In John chapter 1, verse 14, it says, the Word became flesh. Now, look at God's strategy for a second. Look at God's strategy. When God was met with the problem of reaching the whole world with the message of salvation and His gift to mankind, what was His strategy? Now, you may never think of God having a strategy, but what was His strategy? His strategy was to send one man completely packed, full of everything that He was and is, into the world with the task of spreading that to the entire population. And that was on Jesus. Jesus took that responsibility and he fulfilled it. He fulfilled it. Think about that. We're talking about him and he never touched our ground. He never walked the nation that we live in. Was he successful? You better believe he was. Why? Because he followed the mandate of his Father. So the Word became flesh. So what did he do? Well, he turned it back into Word again. He spoke. He relayed. He gave truth. He described himself in Matthew 13 as a sower that goes forth to sow good seed. So he's sowing truth everywhere. So what happened when he turned it into Word? Well, it became flesh again. In his men. In his men, it became flesh. So, what did they do? After the Word had become flesh again, what did they do? Well, they turned around and turned it into Word again. And then it became fleshed in the early church, in their men, in the people that they would disciple. And so on and so forth. So they did the same thing. The book of Acts talks about how they turned it into where the churches were multiplied. Not just people, the churches were multiplied. So they turned it into flesh. So here, this chain keeps going. Word, flesh, word, flesh, word, flesh, until it comes to you and me included in that. Me. You and me. Or you can say yourself or me. The Word became flesh in me. Now what's my responsibility? It's obvious. What do I have to do? I got to turn it back into Word. My question for you is, will it? Do you have any plans for it to continue? Will the link break with you? It's a very tired analogy, but it fits in this situation. A chain is only strongest as its weakest link. My question is, do you want to be the weak link? I'm not talking about following a program. I'm not talking about following me. I'm talking about following Jesus' model. He took the truth and put it into somebody in such a way that they could repeat it to somebody else. Where are those Christians? We must build people to the standard. And here's the standard. World visionary. They must have a world vision. World impacting. See, we don't think we can impact the world, and you're wrong. We can. We just follow a different standard, a different procedure. Well, that's too big for me. I can't go there. Why? Well, I might die. So what? Die before you go. Die before you go. If you die out there, you're dying in style. You want to die comfortable sitting in a rocking chair? That's not what this is about. World visionary, world impacting, multiplying disciples is what this is about. Not just better people. Not just people that sin less. They are sinless in the righteousness of Christ, but I'm talking about they do less wrong deeds. And we think we did our job because we build better people. That betrays Jesus. That betrays His standard. You and I must take personal responsibility for building people into New Testament disciples. Now I've had so many debates. I've had many debates with people about what a disciple is. And it doesn't matter what I think and it doesn't matter what you think. It's what did Jesus build His men into. You build them into that. and you will meet the standard of Jesus. You see, this guarantees future generations. Luke spent so much time that 25%, I can't say that enough, 25% of your New Testament was written by one man to one man. Can I say that 1,000,000 times? By one man to one man. How many people can see the world through one person? And you say, well, I can't see that. Well, you get on God's radar, because that's the way He saw it. He looked at the world and looked through Jesus and impacted the world through Jesus. And don't say you can't do that, because you can do that. Don't say I'm not this, I'm not that, I don't have this. You see, we need to have a confession. Now, I don't want to hear your stories. I don't want to know your dark details. Romans 10:9 and Matthew 10:32 says confession equals agreement with God. You see, we need to stop trying to come up with innovative ideas. We need to stop doing what we think is new and cutting edge and just do what God told us to do. I keep going back to the Great Commission. Go everywhere. Make disciples of all nations. Ta ethne. So do we disagree with God's standard, or do we agree with it? Or are we disobedient to His command? Just because you don't understand it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Just because you can't see it with your physical eyes or your intellect doesn't mean you're not responsible. See, most of the church at large is ignorant of this. They're ignorant of these ideas. Why? Because we can't think like God thinks. And they end up being wrong. Now, I'm not sitting here trying to evaluate everyone. But you know what? If you're listening to this information, guess what? Now you're responsible. It's either do it or be disobedient. I didn't say that. God says that. John 15:16, one of the most popular verses or chapters, talks about the fruit. Talks about the fruit. When you're looking at fruit, you need to think about what fruit is. Now, a lot of people have tried to say what the fruit is. Jesus says, "And I will pray the Father, and He shall give you another Comforter, that He might abide with you forever." So, who's going to produce this fruit? Remember, Jesus said in the Great Commission, "I'm with you always as you go in this commission. I will be with you." And he's in this chapter 15, which talks a lot about fruit. It says that your fruit shall remain. Now let's examine some fruit for a second. Now fruit has two components. All right? Let's just draw an arbitrary fruit, call it whatever you want. Apple, orange, watermelon, whatever. There's two components of fruit. There's the component of nutrition. There's what we call the flesh of the fruit. And what's that for? It's for nourishment. Right? But it also has the seeds. The seeds that are contained in it. So it has the idea of reproduction. Now, if I was to hold a seed, there's certain seeds I could hold in between my fingers. like a watermelon seed. And if I plant that under the right conditions, that seed will duplicate over 1 billion times if it's in size. That's amazing. Contained in that seed. And if you were to plant a watermelon seed, what are you going to get? You're going to get a watermelon. Don't plant a watermelon seed if you want apples. So what are we trying to build? What are we trying to make? You plant what? A believer. Not physically. In Matthew 13, Jesus describes his followers. Not seed isn't just truth, but it's also his followers that's sown into a field. So the future is in the next available person. The future is in the seed. So the question is, am I my brother's keeper? Yes. Yes, you are. You are your brother's keeper. In John 15:16 says, you have not chosen me, but I have chosen you and ordained you that you should go and bring forth fruit, and that your fruit shall remain. That whatsoever ye ask of the Father in my name, it shall be given you. Now that verse has been abused so much. It's not about your fleshly desires. It's about bearing fruit. You go in his idea, you think his thoughts, and he will endorse you the whole way through. But the fruit is also for someone else. You have never seen an apple tree eating an apple. See, I hear Christians talk about it all the time. Fruit in their life, fruit in their life, fruit in their life. And what they really mean is benefits for me, benefits for me, benefits for me. It's not about you, Christian, believer. It's about someone else. Your fruit's not for you. Your fruit's for somebody else. But every time someone partakes of your fruit, there should be an element of reproduction in the fruit that you bear. Where are the believers that think these thoughts? That has these ideas? We think they're extinct. They're not. We think we got to have the elite. We don't. Remember yesterday, common, ordinary men. Now the second part is painstaking research. Painstaking research. The New Testament standard, we must engage in painstaking research of the Word for the sake of the disciples. Most people read their Bible for themselves, and it suddenly curls back on themselves. They're looking for devotional ideas. They're looking for ideas that help them to live a better life. Well, I'm sorry, it's not about you. It's about somebody else. We need to engage, just like Dr. Luke did, for others, for the next person. What we learn is for other people. If you go back to Luke chapter 1, verse 3, the word understanding, it says that they had perfect understanding. It seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding. Now that word is investigated. He deeply investigated. Remember, we said this the other day, that Luke gave the most detailed description of the virgin birth. Well, how did he get that? He investigated. He interviewed. 2 Timothy 2:15 describes it as rightly dividing. 2 Timothy 3:10 says, fully know. See, you're not going to do this casually. You're not going to do this on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. It's bigger than that. This is life-consuming. The word investigate actually means to trace. So when you think about tracing, think about that. You don't have to come up with the image when you trace. You don't have to come up with a new idea when you trace. It's already done for you. All you have to do is duplicate what is there. So that's what we are. Luke described himself as ministers. He says in verse 2, we were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word. Now that word ministers is a loaded word. The word actually means an under-rower. An under-rower. Now, what in the world is an under-rower? Well, back in that time, the way they traveled by ship was not like we've traveled today. Obviously, they didn't have engines, electricity, and gas or diesel engines. What did they have? They had big boats with oars sticking out, and they had people down in the galley rowing this ship. It's a galley slave. Now listen, can you hear it? A galley slave is one who occupies the lowest place to deliver someone else to their final destination. That's what it means to be a minister. That's a minister. Not a title. It's an action. A minister is someone who takes the lowest place in the ship to deliver someone else to their destination. The theme is others, 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 others. Can I say it enough? The third thing is precise resources. Precise resources. Luke's setting things in order. He set things in order. See, you're not going to do this without curriculum. You're not going to do this without systematic curriculum or systematized curriculum. It just won't happen. Jesus couldn't do it that way. Jesus had it. He gave things systematically. He had a purpose, a goal. He said it in a way that they could repeat it. And if you don't think Jesus repeated himself over and over again, you don't know Jesus. It is estimated that Jesus repeated himself over 500 times in his teachings in the Gospels. Because he had 500 different audiences? No. Because he had the same audience 500 times. That's right. They're stupid. They're thick. They're us. It's me. It's you. I got to hear it over and over again. Repetition, repetition. But you must have precise resources or you'll never build disciples with reproduction in them. Because if you're just giving them ideas, that can be duplicated in 5 minutes. What we're giving today is precise resources. Ideas formulated in a repeatable form. Luke 6:40 states, when the process is complete, the disciple will be like his teacher. So you are influencing not just them with ideas, but with tactic, with strategy, with resources. If you don't have precise resources, guess what they won't have? If they don't have precise resources, guess what will happen? It dies with them. Precise resources. We must model Christ. Model Christ. How many times has a believer been told, be Christ-like, be Christ-like? Why? Why be Christ-like? What's the purpose? What's the reason? See, we think it's for us again. It's not. It's for the next person. It's for our next guy. For the next person. See, Luke wrote to one man to give a complete picture of Christ. And remember what we said. Proper information plus spiritual illumination equals vision. So you can't have God's vision without proper information. And you can't give proper information without precise resources. And you can teach the Bible and still not do this. It's about precise resources. The last thing is personal responsibility. I'm sorry, persistent reproduction. Persistent reproduction. There's no success without successors. Successors. We must have successors. We must do all to make sure of reproduction. Remember what I said. If you do not have precise resources, if you do not do the research, if you do not take personal responsibility, neither is the person you're talking to. They're not going to do any of those things either. We must do all to make sure of reproduction. They must clearly see the world as their job to impact it. See, on Sunday morning, Sunday schools, Wednesday nights, whenever you meet, revivals, whatever you want to call it. Where are the people saying, it is my job? Where are the people telling the people, it is your job to impact the whole wide world? Where are those people? Now I want to say something about these four points. I want to run back up on the board. Personal responsibility. Painstaking research. Precise resources. And persistent reproduction. These are just the essentials. Bare minimum. But in this, I want to say this. If you do not take personal responsibility and you do not have persistent reproduction, or if that's not your goal, these two things will not happen. But if you have the personal responsibility and you do, and you want this to eventuate into the ends of the earth, to the end of time, so that after you're dead and gone, it's still going, you must do the research. You must have the resources. It's imperative. And it'll happen immediately. If you have these two will happen automatically. But if you don't have either one of these, if you have this but not this, or you have this and not this, these two won't happen. You wouldn't even want this. You wouldn't even understand it. So think about the essentials for making disciples. One man wrote an incredible document to impact the one. Where are the believers writing the one document? Where are the people thinking these thoughts, dreaming these dreams? Well, we can just keep sloughing back and forth to meetings. or we can get about the business of what the mandate talks about, and that is building world visionary, world impacting, multiplying disciples that will do the same.